just before the holidays. Everybody's worried that the world is about to go off a cliff, but we're still going to celebrate.
See, this is one of the things I want to ask you about. I feel Americans are freaking out a little too much.
I would like to hear you talk me down.
I mean, maybe it's easier just, from the outside, but it's like, so you have a bad president, what else is new?
Well, it would be pretty funny for a Russian to be telling an American to chill out because his leader isn't as bad as he thinks he is.
we might end up talking about the end of the world feelings that you seem to be experiencing.
I don't think I'm the only one.
yeah, that also is a sense I'm getting. And it's not that I am overly optimistic about how things are going to pan out. My sense is, the way people think about the future of the world has more to do with whether they exercise and whether they get enough vitamins than with the actual facts of what's going on.
Yeah. To what degree is our depression? You can flip that in different ways. To what degree is depression or happiness rational? A reasonable response to what's going on in our personal lives or in the world. My own experience of depression makes me think. I mean, depression is almost the most unreasonable mood. On the other hand, when you're in it, it feels all too rational. So my experience of depression was this. Was a really deep, visceral sense that life didn't mean anything and that there was no point in going from one moment to the next. And therefore it became this huge chore.
Yeah.
Moment by moment, it was totally exhausting. And I realized when I was really depressed, and that this was in the early 80s, after all this stuff had happened to me, including this giant psychedelic trip, I just I realized that was a kind of very clear vision of how life actually is, and I realized how much in my ordinary mood I just kind of blithely carry on doing all these stupid things to pass the time because I'm not really paying attention to the passage of time. And depression for me was this acute awareness. I guess it's now that I think about it, kind of the flip side of enlightenment. So enlightenment is you also have a sense of the meaninglessness of much of what you do to pass the time in life, but you're filled with joy. And when you're depressed, I think you see that even joy is kind of silly, right?
I hear you. Yeah. I recently had this conversation. Yeah, I'm not depressed at the moment, nor have I been in the recent days. But I had this feeling recently. I was in a taxi going home, looking at the St. Petersburg in the winter is not it's gloomy. Yeah. I kind of like it, but it's gloomy. I remember when I first came to America, I had this road trip the starting point of the road trip was Seattle, and then we drove south. And, as we go through different towns, people would ask, so, where are you going from? Where are you going to? And when I mentioned we started from Seattle, and this was like early spring, I think we left Seattle maybe at the end of February. And whenever I would mention Seattle, people would have this facial expression like, oh, that's a gloomy place, man. That must be hard. And I came to Seattle from St. Petersburg. I spent half a year in St. Petersburg from autumn to the end of winter. And to me, that was like, what the fuck are you talking about? How is Seattle gloomy? I arrived and the grass was green in February. That's not gloomy. You have a little bit of rain, a little bit of clouds.
The relativism, of it all.
Yeah.
If you're, maybe it's not the state you're in, it's your movement from one state to another. And if the one you're moving toward is better, it makes you feel good. If it's worse, then you don't feel so good. But depression is going beyond that. No matter where you are,
yeah,
you feel shitty.
So I wanted to say, so I was in the stacks and I was looking outside the window, and I had this memory, not a memory, like a recognition of I noticed a state that I was in that is familiar to me and has been familiar to me, from childhood. And I think people have different people have different ways of relating to not just, depression or happiness, but like how you measure happiness, sadness, whether living is worth it or not, all that kind of stuff. And my sense was what you just said, that I relate to that. A chore. There's a difference between sometimes you feel life is, a beautiful creative act. You create reality with every breath that you take, and you're, in a conversation, and there's something new happening, and you're, every day you might experience something new, create something new, articulate something worthwhile, hear somebody say something meaningful, or you might feel that all of that is happening, but it's not that compelling. You're not that into it. We are continuing to play a game, creating these realities, but what's the fucking point? Can we, do we need to do that? Is it anything more than a distraction? I think that relates to your, the big psychedelic trip that you bring up every once in a while. That God is creating this just to distract himself from something, that he doesn't want to face.
Yeah, and then I try to remind myself, because I still think that there is this reality to the insight that, and this is something I've taken away from a bunch of my trips, but I've also had it with meditation, and just, it's a spontaneous feeling that I've had throughout my life, that that there's a miraculousness to every single moment of life as well. That part of the meaninglessness of it, the fact that there is no plan, that we're just here, and there's no reason for us to be here, and it's infinitely improbable that we are here, especially right in this moment, with all the randomness of it. That should fill us with bliss. We should be amazed by every single instant of life. And what's weird to me is that somehow those two insights, that life is totally meaningless, there really is no point in going on from moment to moment, that can exist, that is true, but so is this blissful happiness and gratefulness that we can feel moment by moment, regardless of the actual circumstances of the moment. I don't know if people who say that they're enlightened have that kind of experience of the darkness and the light at the same time. I guess I should watch more of Bob's interviews with people who say that they're enlightened, to see if that's their experience. For me, it's generally kind of an oscillation back and forth, instead of being in the two states at exactly the same time.
There's one of the most recent book by Pelevin has a beautiful kind of, I don't know what it is, a metaphor. It seems, I often feel that his books, you can read them as metaphors, but I think he's actually talking very directly about something that he has experienced, or he's continuing to experience. And the book is, there are two plot lines, one about a group of men and one about a group of women. And the male part is there's this group of oligarchs, very rich people who have everything that they, can want. They have all the luxuries of life, and they're looking for something more than that, but a deeper kind of pleasure. They want to get something more out of life because they already have all the material stuff and all the usual pleasures that people can afford through money. And there's this guy who created a startup, which is, the idea is that there's like a piece of technology that can transmit a state of mind from one person to another. So you put like EEG on one person and on the head of one person and on the other, and you get to experience what that first person is experiencing. And so he partnered with a bunch of Buddhist monks from Burma and got them. So the idea is you're guided to enlightenment, to all of these steps. And it's very technical. Like that part of the book, it's because I know some people who are really into this. They have this rigorous meditative practice. And I've heard, them describe the states. It's called jhanas, I think, in Buddhism. Different like states of mind that you can get to. They have 9 of them or something, and I think the last one is what you call enlightenment. And that book, like it definitely is talking about his direct experience. When he's describing these states, it's quite technical and precise. And so the kind of hook, the turning point of the book is that they get to go through these states with the help of this Buddhist monk. They're not actually achieving this by themselves, by restructuring their own psyche. They're kind of piggyback riding on this monk. And at one point, they get, I forget how it goes. At some point, the monk leaves because they're abusing this whole thing in some way. But at one point, they get very frustrated with this. Their journey is interrupted because the monk decides to not do this anymore. But they've gotten far enough in this process to see all of the fundamental qualities of existence according to Buddhism, that everything is passing. There's nothing permanent in this world. Everything is just, there's qualia that combines into what we experience as pleasure or sadness or whatever. But fundamentally, all of this is empty. There's no substance to any of this, and they're stuck in this place in between, and they're not happy with it. They're like, I used to enjoy my life. I used to eat a good meal and have fun. I used to have sex and it felt good. And now I can have sex, but I'm just experiencing, okay, so this is what I see and this is what I feel, and there's a fleeting sense of this. And at this second, I'm experiencing this, and then that goes away, and there's no fucking point to it whatsoever. And there's this emptiness. And so they get the guy who started the startup, who sold this idea to them, and they threaten him, to throw him, into the water or something if he doesn't bring them back to the normal state of a person who's not anywhere close to enlightenment, but can enjoy life. And then they go through the plan that he comes up with. He's like, okay, I consulted with, the Buddhist literature on this. There are precepts that monks take when they, go into the path to enlightenment. How about we just break every precept there is? We'll find a way to make, do everything wrong, and maybe we'll devolve back into a normal human state.
I love that. By the way, I just have to say, since I don't know if we've talked about Victor Pelevin before, but
we did not.
You turned me on to him months ago, and you thought he would appeal to me, and he really appealed to me a lot. So I think I've read 4 of his novels now, and he's got this kind of like a psychedelic, Zen, nihilistic outlook on things that I just love. But also I feel like he's a warm compassionate person underneath it all, that he actually he portrays humans as monsters, and completely self-deluded and cruel, but he likes us anyway, you know.
I think so. Yeah, it's kind of a question, right? It's, not only in the books, but in interviews, in he seems like he doesn't say a lot of nice things about us.
Yeah.
Us or the world we're in or reality. He seems to be kind of, it kind of goes back to the issue, like the depression thing that you raised. There are, as I said, many ways to relate to whether this is worthwhile or not. And his take, it seems like there's no escape in this. I got trapped in this reality of perceiving myself as existing. And it seems that through mostly meditation, he claims to have stopped doing psychedelics a long time ago. But through whatever various practices, he seems to have gotten to the point where, he subscribes to the Buddhist idea that this is fundamentally an illusion and an empty illusion at that. And, as Buddhists aim for nirvana, for liberation from this illusion, from existence, he seems, I don't know if he's trying to get there or what, but many of his books are just filled with this idea that, like a bitter kind of sense that we're trapped in a reality that's not really a reality, and there's no getting away from it, and every pleasure or sense of meaning that we find in it is also kind of a trick that we're playing on ourselves, or it's not entirely clear what is planning on what God is planning on himself, herself, themselves. But yeah, there's definitely that quality to his work.
I'm curious how somebody like that motivates himself to write. I would assume that, our minds are complicated, that there's part of him that obviously is very creative. I feel as though he also sees himself as a social critic. So he thinks that the kind of hyper capitalism that we have in the United States now, and that Russia has in an even more cartoonish form, is really terrible. And he wants to point out how terrible it is, even though it gives us these fleeting pleasures and the joy of competition and all that it's really making us rotten at the core.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to get back to this question of what we see when we're really seeing things as they are. I've been thinking about this recently and working on a blog post about it because of an article in the New Yorker that goes back a couple of months by this really talented writer named Larissa McFarquhar. And I like everything that she's written. And in this piece, she's writing about people with dementia in nursing homes, which doesn't sound like a very promising topic. But it turns out that there has been this big debate for quite a while over how to treat people who were really senile, whether to indulge their delusions, or whether to keep trying to get them to confront reality and remember where they are, that they actually are in nursing homes, that they are 85 or 90 years old, that almost everybody that they know, all their friends and their spouses are dead. So the people who run this industry has gone back and forth in this question. And for a long time, it was thought that, I guess there were some studies that showed if you keep reminding people of what reality is, that it's good for them, that they might actually come out of their fog a little bit, if only temporarily. But recently, things have shifted the other way toward going with their delusions and even creating the the setting in the nursing homes to feed their delusion. So some nursing homes now they have a central space that looks like a little town square in some all-American town, almost like in Disney World, like something that's very nostalgic. And you'll have stores that are just fake. They're not real stores, but they create the illusion of a town. And there will even be a bus stop that can take you somewhere else. And so people will go to the bus stop and sit there, and they'll think that the bus is going to come and pick them up and take them somewhere else. And the aides, the nurses, don't destroy the illusion. They, somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to go and visit my sister in the town next door," and is sitting at the bus stop. The nurse will say, "Okay, that's great. I hope that bus will come soon." And then, of course, the person soon forgets what they're doing at the bus stop, and then they just go back to their room. And so the question is, and actually this is something that's posed in the Matrix really, really brilliantly. There's the bad guy who betrays his friends, and the evil agent who's gotten him to do this. Bad guy's name is Cypher, and the evil agent Smith says to Cypher, "Okay, what do you want in exchange for betraying your friends?" And Cypher says, I want to live in the Matrix, and I want you to give me the best life possible. I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I want to be an actor. He can't think of any better life than being an actor. And he says, and I don't want to remember any of this. I don't want to have any connection to reality. And who can really argue with that as a choice? Especially since it's possible that it's illusions all the way down. I mean, the choice is hard enough if you have a sense of there being something called reality, and then this set of illusions that we live in. And of course, we all live in a world of illusions to some extent. We are always denying certain things that we don't want to confront. But if you have a really radical metaphysics that says that it's illusions all the way down, then why not just pick an illusion that makes you happy? And what I love about this article by McFarquhar is that, this is normally the kind of thing that philosophers talk about, and it doesn't really mean anything. But this is this question of happy delusion versus painful reality is something that relatives of these people with dementia face, and they have to decide what kind of nursing home they want to put their loved one in. But also, you can sign advance directives. Like, let's say you're getting the early signs of Alzheimer's. You can sign an advance directive that will tell people how you want to be treated once you really become demented. Do you want them to keep reminding you that you're just this old senile person, or to feed some kind of fantasy that you have that makes you feel better?
Well, I have a bunch of reactions to that. First is I've heard about the bus stop thing a long time ago, and it was presented differently. That was presented, I don't remember where I've heard or read about it, but it was presented as a solution to a problem that some of these homes have with patients running away. And they said that people often, want to run away, and you have to catch them somewhere, near the home. And they figured out a way to solve it. They put a fake bus stop, and the person is sitting there waiting for a bus that will never come, and you don't have to run around catching these people. They forget that at some point they come back because they forget what they were doing at the bus stop. So it has a kind of a sinister, to me, a sinister ring to it. Like you're you still there?
Yeah, I lost you for a few seconds, actually.
So this thing about retirement homes, that's a really good kind of case study or something, that a way to think about this deeper, more not necessarily deeper, but broader issue of, are we all patients in some sort of a mental institution?
Yeah.
Or, what is going on? It's, the thing about, I listened to a conversation, I think it was on the Rogan's podcast. There was an AI researcher, a very kind of eccentric, weird, interesting guy. And Rogan asked him about the simulation theory. And I really like the response of this guy, that I think it should... I'm kind of perplexed as to why that is not everybody's response to this question. So Rogan asked him something to the extent of, like, what do you think about the simulation theory? It all could be a simulation. And he asked, a simulation of what? And Rogan was kind of like, he just continued to like expand on the idea that it might be all an illusion, right? It might be some sort of a program running on some sort of a computer, and we are all, experiencing a world that doesn't exist. But, that's fine. That a way of looking at things that I think is way older than the current iteration with the simulation theory and the computer involved in it. And, Gnostics had a very similar idea without the technology to base this idea around. But even if it is a simulation, then the question is, what is the purpose of that simulation? Who is running it? What are we engaged in here? And the same goes for all of these ideas of, illusory nature of reality. To me, one way to look at it is to point out that it's illusion. It's not real in some sense. But you can look at the same thing. Like great fiction is also about things that have never happened. When you read a book by Dostoevsky, you can say, well, none of this happened. This... You can focus on the fact that this is a story that never happened, but it conveys some sort of a truth. It's compelling to us, even though it never happened, because it says something true about things that do happen, maybe truer than any one particular factual story, right? And so if we look at our reality as illusory, the question is what kind of illusion this is. And we, since we seem to be playing a part in the illusion, at least that's how it feels, then, it becomes a kind of a creative enterprise. And then it's your job to figure out what it is that you're trying to do with this. And it's like we started with the topic of depression, like that sense that I recently had, and it just rang so... It was so familiar from like kindergarten times to me, that, we keep creating this. There's no escape in this. You just wake up every goddamn day and there's no way out of this. The world continues to exist and you continue to exist in it, and you need to do things, it just goes on. And sometimes it feels exciting and you're drawn into it, and sometimes you kind of feel, what is the goddamn point? And that, to me, like the way I relate to this is through metaphors of any sort of creative work. If you're writing a book or whatever, sometimes it feels like, something is just flowing through you and it's exciting. You give existence to ideas that enamored you in the first place, and sometimes you're stuck with, why what was the point of doing this? I can create something, but do I need to? Is it, what is the purpose of this thing?
Yeah.
This brings me to another question. You've recently just reposted an older post of yours on Scientific American that mentioned the problem of evil. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it in the book and in some of the conversations that you had on the podcast, The Mind Body Problems. And so is that a thing is that like a persistent issue that you are concerned with?
Yes. So
I'm asking because it's like it's kind of confusing to me because I don't totally get why that is such a big question.
It must be because I was raised Catholic, and the older I get, the more I realize how much, I decided that I didn't buy Catholicism anymore by the time I was maybe 11 or 12, but it's just shaped me. I mean, intellectually, I think I'm still a Catholic in that I care about, I worry about the meaning of life and the purpose of life, and I worry about I worry about good and evil. I care about human suffering in a way that I think is kind of Catholic. And maybe it's just as simple as wondering where, okay, let's just say, talking about simulation theory, what's the point of the simulation? And especially, if we just stop talking about God and let's say it's some super intelligent alien in another parallel universe or something that created us for whatever reason, then that's the question. What was the reason? And the question is particularly urgent and important when you consider that life is so hard. And,
right.
If this is a simulation, the pain feels pretty real. And and you can't, to say that pain is an illusion is senseless. Pain is pain, whatever its source might be. And so that question, if I care about what the hell we're doing here and whether there is some kind of plan or purpose. And the reason that I keep coming back to that is because the world seems very designed. I just cannot believe that all this came about through a series of a long string of coincidences. And so then that's what keeps bringing me back to the question of what's it for, what's the purpose, and what's our relationship to the creator if there is a creator.
Right.
And why would the creator make life so hard? And there are lots of different answers that people have come up with. As you know, you've read about this crazy trip that I had. But the answer I came up with is that God doesn't like that there is a God, that there is this one solitary mind that somehow came into existence. And this mind doesn't even know how it came into existence and realizes that there's no reason for it to exist. I'm talking about God or the thing behind the simulation or whatever. And so is freaking out and having this identity crisis and creates all this reality here in reaction to this identity crisis. And it's got to be a compelling, urgent simulation or illusion or whatever you want to call it, a story that it's telling, that it's invented. And that's why there has to be suffering. The stakes have to be high. It's a pretty fucked up theology, but it's the only theology that I can come up with. And one of the implications also is that, this is going back to the question of illusion versus reality. The premise of philosophy and science and all our and religion, all our truth-seeking modes is that, of course, there are, we have various false ideas about the world, but that even to talk about the world in that way assumes that there's a ground of being. I love that phrase, the ground of being. That's what everything is resting on. And, my biggest trip, mystical epiphany, told me that there is no ground of being. And that even if you're God, you're this infinitely intelligent alien, smart enough to create this simulation. you don't know what's going on. You're not on a ground of being. It's illusions all the way down, or it's just these false ideas that we as stories all the way down. When you were talking before, I was thinking about when you were talking about Dostoevsky. I was thinking about Joyce and his great work that nobody can possibly understand, Finnegan's Wake. Have you, by any chance, have you ever?
I haven't even tried Finnegan's Wake. I think I have Ulysses on a bookshelf, but that Joyce is, I think, something that I will never be able to get to. I'm really interested, like all of the things that point to his work, like other people that I admire or get excited about their work are excited about Joyce. Problem is, I don't think there's any point in reading a translation because, everything would be lost there. And it's not fucking possible, I think, for a non-native English speaker to read the original. I tried. I read a page, and I'm not entirely sure what I've read.
Well, I mean, I sort of feel like I relate to Joyce because I'm Irish Catholic. I mean, that's how I was raised, and for some reason, Joyce really speaks to me. But his work is really hard. Ulysses is really difficult, and Finnegan's Wake is completely impenetrable. But I took a course on it, and so I was forced to read it, and it was like a long drug trip. I sort of entered into the world, but and enough to sort of get the metaphysics of it, and by that I mean sort of, he's trying to present a full world and to get at this question of what's real and what's illusion. And the whole book is actually a dream. You're sort of in the dream of this narrator, but then there are dreams nested within dreams. And by the end of it, I realized that Joyce also was saying that there's no ground of being. There's no there's no basic truth on which all the dreams are resting. It's not like you can wake up and then, you're leaving Plato's cave and then you see what's really going on. Joyce is saying that it's dreams all the way down. Yeah. And, the way I would put it is that if you want to talk about it in Catholic terms about the creator versus us as the creations, the creator is just dreaming us. And then the question is what you're supposed to do with that kind of insight or belief or whatever you want to call it. It's just something that to me gives me a little pleasure. It gives me the illusion of feeling that I have stuck my head out of the cave a little bit. But of course, even that idea is contradicted by what I'm saying. If there is no ground of being, that means you can't ever leave the cave. You're stuck in the cave constantly. Or you can leave the cave and think you're outside it, but you're just in another cave.
Yeah.
And it actually gives me pleasure to think that. It doesn't make life meaningless to me. I get pleasure out of talking to people about it because it lifts me out of my life a little bit.
Yeah. So as you were speaking, I thought of several things. One is, so the problem of evil thing, to me, is kind of like a non-issue in a sense, and I'll explain what I mean. I know you're a fan of Louis C.K. Have you seen Horace and Pete?
What's it called?
Horace and Pete.
No.
Oh, you should definitely watch it. It's one of the best things he's done. It's like a TV show that he just put on his website, an episode after an episode, and I was so impressed by this. Apart from just the thing itself is amazing. It's also a very interesting experiment in how he released it. He filmed the whole thing in secret, funded it himself, and then at a random Saturday or something, people who are subscribed to his like email list on the site got this message that just said, hey, I just made a thing. It's on the site. You can go check it out. And you go there and it's the first episode, but it doesn't say that it's the first episode of a series or anything. There's just, I made a thing, and you can get it for $5 or something. And if you Google the title at that time, you just find other people who are saying, I just got this email from Louis C.K. saying that he's made a thing. What is it about? And so everybody was confused. And you watch the thing, and even after you finish the first episode, it's not clear whether it's, was it a movie? Is this all? Or is there going to be a continuation? And so he, like week after week, he put out a new episode. And it's a beautiful, beautiful work, and it's sad and kind of grim, but funny at times too. The reason I'm bringing this up is I listened to an interview of his after he released it, and you saw, like, at several points in the story, in the show, he plays one of the characters himself, and he cries several times in the show. And I remember, like, the first time I saw him cry, I thought, wow, Louis C.K. is getting good at acting. And then at one point, I even felt like maybe the third time I felt, okay, so he learned how to cry and now he can't stop. He's really kind of abusing this new skill of his. And I listened to an interview, and it turned out that this was not in the script. He was not supposed to cry. He was crying because he cared about the characters so much, and he cared about the story so much that he felt overwhelmed with emotion in certain scenes. And so he was suffering with the character that he was playing. And more importantly, the story ends, I will not reveal what the story is about, but it ends, there's suffering in how it ends. And he said in this interview that he realized where the story is headed before he wrote the final episodes. And he took a break, like a couple of, he's done most of the work, and he knows there's just the ending that needs to be written, and he postponed it for like a month or something because he didn't want to write that ending. He was hoping that maybe he'll find something else. And that didn't lead to anything. He wrote the end, and he knew that it has to go in that direction. And so, problem of evil. If there is a God that can do anything that he wants with the story, and that he loves the people in that story, in the world, why would he make them suffer? That, to me, is not that big of a question if you consider any sort of creative act where, like, Louis C.K. could theoretically write a very happy ending to that story. He clearly cared for the characters that he created, but he couldn't, in some sense, write. If he did write a happy ending, that would be a cop-out. That would be, that would be a lack of artistic integrity, because he was not writing a Hallmark postcard. An artist writing a story like that is trying to express something true, and the way he feels about, he knows a little bit about life and about suffering, and it's a part of life, and so that needs to be expressed. And so that, to me, like, if there is some sort of an intelligence that is creating what we're in, I'm hoping that they're not creating this for banal reasons, and I'm hoping that there is, not just hoping, but when I'm not depressed, it feels like we're all part of this creation, and we can sense our involvement in it. And when you're not totally depressed, you feel like there's some meaning to it, and meaning to suffering, and meaning to the happy moments of life. And so, why is there suffering? Well, because it's there. Because if you're writing a story and you make your character suffer, that's not because you want them to suffer. It's because you know that that's part of the story, right?
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, I have a couple of responses to that. Part of the problem of evil for me is not just suffering in itself, but the unfairness of how suffering is meted out.
Right.
So I think, in addition to growing up Catholic, I also grew up in a pretty privileged background. And so my dad was a pretty successful businessman, and I, from the time I was, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, I went to private schools until I eventually got kicked out of a private school that I went to. But I always felt guilty. I'd look out in the world and I'd see people who had so much less than I did, and I felt that I just thought it was unfair, and I still have that. And if God is loving and just, then why? I agree with you that that there's a lot to be said for how we can share each other. We can share our suffering. We can talk about it. We can commiserate. We can show each other pity and compassion. But some people really get fucked over by life.
Yeah.
And others, and I'm not one of those people. I mean, of course, bad things have happened to me, but they're trivial compared to the bad things that happen to. So I'd say probably a majority of people who ever have lived. And this becomes an interesting question also when you consider that we're doing our best to try to make life more fair and reduce suffering. And according to various measures, life is getting better for more and more people all the time. And if you want to get sort of more sci-fi about it, there's also the possibility, you mentioned this novel, the Pelevin novel, in which there's a technology that can transfer the happiness of monks to other people. Well, that reminded me of this scientist that I actually interviewed for my book, Rational Mysticism. His name is Michael Persinger, and he claimed to have invented a device that could electromagnetically tickle your brain so that you could have religious experiences. And he didn't call it the God machine, but journalists started calling it the God machine. And it turned out to be, I tried it out and it didn't work on me. And Richard Dawkins tried it out and he didn't have an experience of God. It turned out that it was effective mainly through the power of suggestion. People knew that they were going into the God machine, and some of them would have these experiences. But it raises the question, what if it's not inconceivable at all that we could have devices or drugs or genetic engineering that could reliably reduce or even eliminate our pain? And I mean, I know people who are sort of into this idea, and they say all we would have is experiences of different levels of bliss. And, the neuroscientists are all over this. If you could, so imagine an antidepressant that actually worked. The antidepressants we have now are very ineffective. They're terrible. They make a lot of people feel worse over the long run. But it's conceivable that scientists will actually figure out all the different neural processes that are correlated with our feelings of sadness, melancholy, depression, existential despair, and be able to counteract those. And we'll have the equivalent of, we'll have completely self-directed moods. You want to be happy?
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's very disturbing. It's sort of, this is what Brave New World was about. The novel Brave New World was sort of about this possibility and made it a nightmare. And I think that, there's too much unhappiness now. I guess the question is, how much unhappiness can you eliminate? And unhappiness encompassing everything from, all the many varieties of pain and suffering. How far could we go technologically toward eliminating unhappiness on demand and still be human?
I kind of feel, if unhappiness exists, I kind of feel it must have a function. I'm certainly, just thinking on a personal level, if I am really sad, I don't want to take a drug that is just going to make me unsaid. I want to experience the sadness, and usually something comes out of it. It usually, is worthwhile to feel, that part of the spectrum of human emotion too.
Yeah.
You said something that made me think. What did you just say just now? It made me think of. There's one of the. There's an idea that what we are engaged with, what we're going through, is a kind of a process, maybe of healing or of an incomplete work getting closer to completion. And so one way that I like to look at things is through this lens of Gnosticism, which, I'm not a well-educated person. The way I get these, I get a part of an idea, I read something, and then I just think about it on my own. And so I'm never really sure whether an idea that I have is something that I've learned from somebody, or I got a part of it and watched the rest, and then I have whatever I have as the result. But the way I understand the kind of creation myth of Gnosticism is there is I guess a kind of a ground of being in their cosmology. So there's the real God, they call it the unknowable Father, the source of all creation. And from that source, there are kind of like these concentric circles of emanations from it. And the very last of them is called Sophia, wisdom. And she's so far away from the source that she kind of is losing contact with that fundamental source of all creation. She is herself a continuation of that creation, the frontier of creation, pure, beautiful, perfect creation. But she's so far from the source that she's kind of lost, and she really wants to continue this creation, but she doesn't quite get the rules because she's so far away from the beginning. And so in an attempt to continue this process, or another way they formulate it is to know the unknowable Father, which is, you can't do that. That's why it's called unknowable. Or to create without a sanction from this source. She creates something, and it's not good. What she creates, it's described as an abortion, it's described as a mistake, and she looks at it and feels, she goes through shame and fear and all of these negative emotions that anybody who has tried to create something good and created something very you try to write a story and it's just the worst kind of banal shit that there is. You don't feel good about yourself. And then I think the way, or at least one of the ways the story goes, is those emotions that she went through kind of condensed and became this world, the matter that we're in, and this creature that she created that caused all of those emotions is the character that we know from the Old Testament as the God of that narrative. And that creature, they call it the demiurge, the architect. He is, the ruler of this world. He is the force that he's kind of the laws of this material world, but he is not the God, and he is blind to his own creation. He thinks he just appeared and there's this world and he rules it, and so he thinks he's the God, but he's actually just this kind of like the first draft that didn't come out well because she was not in the spot where she wasn't doing the creative act in the way that's supposed to be done, and so it just came out wrong. And then this is kind of part of the story where I got distracted, and I'm not entirely sure what happens next. But there's some way that she, we our souls in that myth are like sparks of divine light from that ultimate reality that is trapped in this world of matter. And there's a way through which Sophia tried to, get in touch with us and give us a chance for kind of redemption. And so this whole elaborate story to me is one way of looking at things as like, whatever this is, illusion, work of art, beautiful creation of omnipotent God, it's continuing, it's not fixed. And maybe what we're doing is trying to get, if it seems meaningless, then our purpose is to try to imbue it with meaning. If it seems worthless, give it some worth. If it seems it's filled with suffering, try to elevate that suffering and bring some happiness into it, or make that suffering worthwhile or something. And so if you look at it this way, then maybe a reality is, let's say, sick or something like that. But if there is sickness, then there is an opportunity to heal that, and maybe that's what we're experiencing. Or battling. Maybe we will get well, maybe we will not. But this is an unfinished process in which we're engaged, and that's what's going on. That's what you can play a part in.
Yeah, so after I wrote about this, in The End of Science, came out in 1996, I described this drug trip that I'd had, in which I felt like I became God and I was having this identity crisis, and it was really great, and then it was really terrible. And then people wrote to me after that and said, "Well, you're describing Gnosticism."
Right.
And so then I ended up reading a lot about Gnosticism and talked about it somewhat in my book, Rational Mysticism. I think even Gnosticism is consoling in a way, because it does suggest, it creates this narrative. Yeah, we're in a broken world, a world of illusion, and but we're striving to get out of it. There's the real God, above the demiurge, the Gnostics call it, demiurge, who's created this terrible world that we live in. And there are things we can do to transcend this world and get to the real God, who's really great. And this is also the narrative of Buddhism. It's the narrative of Christianity. It's the narrative of all religions, which say that, yeah, this reality isn't so great, but there are things we can do to get to this level where everything is fantastic. And often it involves some kind of process of our merging with this great blissful perfection. And the problem that I had with this is that again, going back to, this is all just my own subjective experience, but what the hell, that's all I've got. And we're all just wandering in the dark here. But my experience led me to think that the real God, if there is a real God, is not happy with being God. And that therefore this narrative we've created of trying to get up to that level, and then everything is going to be okay, and there's this wonderful, loving merging together of everything into some kind of oneness, it just doesn't work. And it's God's experience of oneness that is the problem. God is lonely and depressed. Doesn't like being all by himself. And this creates the identity crisis that I talked about, and it leads to this creation. I write about, what I love about blogging is that I get to write about any kind of crazy shit. I write about this kind of stuff on my blog. I just had a piece about, so there was another blogger for Scientific American who wrote about the the doctrine of oneness, which is so important to Buddhism and other spiritual paths. And that when we're in these deep meditative states or enlightened, we realize that there's no difference between us and everything else, and there's really only one big thing, and that when you reach that state of realization, you feel really, really great. And then I wrote a post about how my own experiences of oneness were nightmarish. And the problem for me is, and this is my intellect working on it, that there's no difference between there being just one thing and there being nothing at all. That life and existence and consciousness are all relational. I'm here and you're there, and there's this thing happening between the two of us. And that's expanded. That's what life is. That's what existence is. If there's only me, then that's the same as there being nothing at all, even if I'm God. And so oneness is like this black hole. It's something that we might approach and be thinking that everything is really great, but then if we reach a certain point and we're repelled by it, we realize that oneness is actually oblivion. It's not the highest form of consciousness. It's no consciousness at all. It's the equivalent of death. Anyway, this is why. So people out there who are thinking about taking psychedelics after reading Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, or hearing people talk about how cool psilocybin and microdosing LSD is, psychedelics can take you towards some really dark, scary revelations as well. And this is the revelation that I had, that at the end of all the spiritual paths, that heaven, that nirvana, all those that perfection that we're all striving for is not so great.
Yeah. There is another lens through which I often look at things and it's, again, just found a little piece of an ancient idea and then interpret it in my own way and deal with that now. There's this notion, Christian, Gnostic as well, notion of logos, the word of God. In the beginning there was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. And the way I understand that, to me, I feel kind of confident having my own interpretations of that, because I almost feel like that once you introduce a concept like that, it's a concept similar to the concept of God. Like when you talk to different people, it's a legit question, what do you mean when you say God? Because it's a word that points to something that can't be expressed, and the pointer itself is like, that's enough. You can start with that, and then you create any kind of theology out of it. And with this idea of logos, the way I understand it is it points to a fundamentally linguistic nature of reality and of God and of consciousness. And what I mean by linguistic is it's something like language in very broad sense of that word. And it's something like communication. So you can look at, and that to me is a very rich idea that can be then applied in so many different ways, and it's worth thinking about different ways of applying it. So if what we're going through and what we are is some sort of a linguistic enterprise, some sort of communication, then we know there are different kinds of communications. It might be one of the established idea in theology of different schools is that the world is like a book, that you have the Bible that you can read and get an understanding of what the world is, or you can read nature, you can read the world around you. And that's one way of looking at things. And then if it's a story that's written, then the questions rise: why God wrote that story this way? Who are we? Are we readers of that story, or are we characters in that story? A friend of mine suggested, I'm still don't know what to do with that idea, but I'm very fascinated by it. I listed these options. Are we the writer? Are we the characters? Are we the reader? Can there be more options? I can think, of more. And she said, maybe we are somebody to whom the story is dedicated.
Huh. That's nice.
And I have no idea what to do with that now. It's been like a year since she said that. I'm still fascinated by it, but can't figure out what to do with that option now. But so that is, those are 4 options. But then maybe it's not a book. Maybe it's a conversation. In which case, how do you have a good conversation? You try to listen and you try to talk when you have something worthwhile to say, and you try to be empathetic. And what you were saying just now about oneness and the way that can be equated to nothing at all, the way I thought about it is, if it is a conversation, if let's say that we can take that same Gnostic myth, and then Sophia tried to have a conversation and she said something, and then after she said something she felt horrible and got no response, and maybe what we're living in is a conversation that never happened. Maybe it's, she really wanted to talk to somebody, and then she said something and there was no response, and she's just feeling she's stuck in a loop of a conversation that never happened. Like you see a pretty girl and you want to talk to her, and instead you're talking to yourself about the possibility of talking to her, and maybe that's our reality, right? Or maybe, and so it's, if I can see how oneness can be God talking to himself like a madman on that bus stop. Right?
Yeah.
So it's those are all open questions to me, but I do have a sense that we are part of this thing, and so it depends on what we do with it, and what kind of role we play in it. And you know what? I didn't have much. I do have some notes, but fewer than I had when we first talked, when we did the first episode of the Mind-Body Problems. And my idea for today's conversation was it worked. Not the way I thought it would work, but it just happened the way I hoped it would happen. The idea was, when we recorded that one, we got some nice comments, and the comments that I liked the best said things along the lines of, this is a really cool conversation. I felt like I was eavesdropping on you guys just talking amongst yourself. And, that felt nice. And I think this is part of what this whole podcasting thing, like broadly, is about, the blurring of the line between private and public conversations. There are these podcasts now that, there are 2 guys talking for 3.5 hours, and they are having a conversation. The main thing that's happening is 2 people having a conversation between themselves. But then there are these millions of people who get to be a part of that conversation somehow. And that's very exciting to me, and I think worthwhile, and I think it's changing the dynamic of communication globally in a good way. But reading those comments, I also thought that's not actually true in some sense. Like, that conversation was like, you have a book that was published and we wanted to present it, and we did that. And I prepared some questions and it largely went according to the plan. That thing had a purpose outside of us talking. But at the same time, you and I have known of each other's existence for a few years, and we done some work together. We collaborated on the book, but we also don't know each other. We've had maybe this might be the 4th conversation that we're having, or something like that. And I wanted to, the main idea that I had for this conversation is to say that up front and then see what happens, because I want to, you have a set of issues in the book or now in the podcast, and just topics that keep appearing in your writing, in your thought. Do we have free will? The problem of evil? How does consciousness arise from matter? Does it arise from matter, or maybe it's the other way around? I think adjacent to all of these questions is the question, the mystery of human communication. Like, you and I are two apes that have figured a way out to use technology created by other apes to, make noises at each other through this distance that is separating us. And it's not clear what exactly is going on here. It's not clear what the purpose of this is, what we're engaged in. And that, to me, like, I think any sort of theology or like cosmology or whatever metaphysics that you might have, for it to be, worthwhile, it must be applicable to every small segment of life, every piece of life. It needs to be, you should be able to experience it, relate to it in anything that you do. And so we're talking now, is that a lonely God talking to himself through masks of John Horgan and Nikita Petrov? Are these actually two separate human beings who are trying to figure shit out? It's not clear, but it is, how do I put it? When I have a good conversation, I know that I've had a good conversation, When I have a bad conversation, I know I have a bad conversation. There's a felt experience of either doing this thing correctly or worthwhile or something, or it's not happening. So to my mind, that's kind of all you need. You just need to, I don't know if we're ever going to be clear on what is going on, but it's much easier to be clear on whether you're playing your part well or not. And that is also the part that you can actually affect. And so that's kind of enough.
Wow, that's beautifully said. I almost everything you say triggers so many different thoughts in my head that I almost don't know where to begin. Part of our design as humans, so Bob Wright, the creator of this site, who I feel like I do know Bob pretty well. And I've spent, unlike you, I've actually, been with Bob face to face many times over periods of decades. And he focuses on how, as animals designed by natural selection, we're designed to get our genes in the next generation. We're not designed to be happy, and we need Buddhism as the kind of cure for that. The problem that I have with our design is that we're designed to sort of get shit done as efficiently as possible without a lot of excess thinking, and so we become automatons. We become zombies, and that happens to me all the time. And I see, suffering and pain. Those are a problem. But my struggle is mainly with the zombie part of my nature.
Right.
That sort of, I end up just sort of sleepwalking through days. And
I hear you, man. Yeah.
And so then, and I do various things to try to wake myself up a little bit, and we're only ever waking up partially. But we sort of stick our heads above all this shit that we get mired in day after day, and we get a little bit of distance from it. And one of the best ways that I have of doing it, and other people often are part of the problem, right? But other people can also help you get out of it. And you realize, we're breaking through our shells. Each of us is trapped in the little sphere of our own consciousness. and we're only guessing what's really going on in other people's minds. But now and then we have something that feels like real communication, and you recognize, yeah, this person is just as fucked up and confused as I am, and that makes me feel a little better. And maybe we talk about this, the mystery of everything in a way that we're not solving it, but we're sharing our experiences in a way that, for me, makes me feel better. And and that's when writing is really working, is when you feel like you're expressing some stuff that you're going through, and then people are responding and saying, hey, yeah. I mean, some people respond and say, you're a goddamn idiot. I have no idea what you're talking about. But others, they sort of understand. And that's a nice feeling. So, I'm glad to be here too, Nikita.
Well, there you go. See, Trump notwithstanding.
Yeah, right.
You know what? There was recently a moment where I felt this whole idea, you can think about the world as a simulation, as there are different kinds of phrasing, describing this illusory nature of reality. When I saw, there's a video online, it was, I guess maybe the fires in California are subsiding or are they over?
Jeez, I haven't read about them in a while, so I assume that means that they're under control.
Yeah, but there was a time when they were not under control at all.
Yeah.
And there's a video online of this woman just driving through, she's on a highway, I guess, some sort of a road, and she's just driving through fire. Fire is everywhere, and she's just saying, oh my God, and she's trying to get away. But it's literally just fire everywhere, to the left of her, to the right of her, and on the road, and she's just trying to get through it. And when I saw that, with the backdrop of the reality TV star as the president, and Pepe the Frog and Kek the God of Chaos being political entities now, and people carrying flags of the Free Republic of Kyrgyzstan at political rallies, the metaphor that it didn't even feel like a metaphor. I thought maybe different parts of the world are different kinds of illusions. And like in Russia, Russia is it's called sometimes a logocentric country, meaning literature plays a very big role in how Russian reality is experienced and felt. And when I saw that video of this woman driving through fire, I thought maybe America is like a computer game, and you guys, it's like you're on one level and the monsters are a certain kind, and then you get to the next level and suddenly it's basically the same terrain, but everything is on fire, and Trump is the president, and the cops have more gear on them, and it's just, you're dealing with a higher level of trouble. That was a tangent. I wanted to say something different.
Yeah, shit's pretty crazy here, but life goes on. I'm about to celebrate Christmas with my kids. I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to see my girlfriend this afternoon. So Voltaire has this phrase, try not to worry about the world too much, just tend to your own garden.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what, of course, if your garden is on fire, that's a problem.
I remember what I wanted to say. You talked about, sleepwalking through life, and we're trying to wake up. I've always had a little problem with this. This is a central metaphor for Buddhism and for other schools of thought. And maybe just because I really like sleeping, and I hate it's 8 when we started talking, it was 8 a.m. where you are. That's crazy to me to wake up at 8 a.m. and do these kinds of conversations. And so I've always I remember when I had to wake up in the mornings, one of my favorite songs when I was in university was the Beatles' I'm Only Sleeping. We just asked to leave me the fuck alone. I'm sleeping. That's a fantasy. Yeah, I'm in a dream. I want to pay attention to the dream. And And that to me, so the metaphor, I struggle with the metaphor of we're sleepwalking through life, so we need to wake up. I don't think it's healthy when you're asleep to be freaking out about how you need to wake up. I think you're going to wake up when your body gets enough sleep and your brain gets enough sleep. Like, that thing is there for a reason. And that leads me to, I try to pay attention to dreams and to sleep. And more than waking up, I think what I wanted to achieve is something akin to the state of lucid dreaming. When you're aware that this is a dream, and I get lucid dreams sometimes, and there's like a spectrum of that experience. Sometimes it's a dream and it is like a simulation. That is, you can, like Neo in the Matrix, you can do anything, or like a god in a little world that you've created, you can do anything and play around if you want to. My favorite kinds of dreams, though, lucid dreams, are when I'm aware it's a dream. I understand and sense and experience the reality I'm in as an illusory, dream state. But there's something going on. There are characters, there's a plot, there is an interaction, there's something to engage with, deal with. And one of the dreams I had like that made an influence on me and is connected to all of these things that we've been talking about, world as communication. So usually in these kinds of dreams there are different kinds of characters. There is me who experiences the dream. There are characters who very clearly are just, they have no inner life. They're more like characters in computer games, NPC kind of characters, where it's just those are usually, in these dreams, it's some kind of obstruction. It's these forces that try to get me forget that I'm in a dream and get me, play some fucking game that they have prepared for me, get distracted and forget what is going on, and just bog me down in some plot. I need to chase somebody, or I need to run away from somebody, or there's this important thing happening, and none of this is, and I forget if I don't have enough attention to spare, I might get stuck in that. And then there are characters who feel like myself, fellow travelers who I can talk to and see what they think about what's going on. And then there are characters that are very much of the dream world, but there's some weird, colorful, like that's a separate character that has something going on. You can engage with them with some purpose. And so I had one dream where it started off as, it was not a lucid dream at the beginning. It was I'm running away from somebody, there's this issue to deal with, there's that issue to deal with, and then slowly I start figuring out that this is a dream. And I meet different kinds of characters like that, from, these almost like Agent Smith in the Matrix type characters. It's all the same face. It's the person you're talking to is not the person, it's just this force that's trying to, bog you down. And then so anyway, in one point of that dream, I managed to get away from these, there were cops chasing me, there was this, there was that. And I'm stumbling through this. I didn't know I'm gonna start sharing my dreams in this conversation. So at first there were like, I was running away from these cops, I think. And they are like SWAT looking people with like machine guns and bulletproof vests and all that. And at one point I realized, wait, if this is a dream, I don't need to be afraid of their guns. And as soon as I realized that, they realized, okay, this strategy is not working anymore. He's not afraid of this anymore. So they started just making a lot of noise so that I can't talk to other characters in the dream. And then at one point, I managed to get away from them in some sort of like a room where there are no distractions like that. There's none of this chatter or forces that try to get me to run somewhere. And I was surrounded by these dream characters, very colorful, different, like a set of characters of some sort. And they were frustrated. They voiced this frustration with me, hoping that maybe I can help them. And the frustration was, they said something like, my whole life is like a sentence. I'm in a loop of some sort. I keep kind of expressing something, but I don't even know the meaning of that sentence. Like, my whole life is this thing that I have no idea what to do with it and what's the purpose of it, and I'm stuck in this. And they all had different sentences like that. And I was standing among them, and I was just going, okay, so what's your thing again? And they would say me, their piece, and I would turn to another one, and yours is what? And they would say that. And I felt I can maybe help because they are stuck, each is stuck in their own sentence, and I can hear different ones, and maybe we can we never figured it out. That there was, dream took another turn. But this idea that, if reality is a linguistic kind of thing, and it is factually in some sense, like we know that, we have DNA, that's a sequence of, bits of information, right?
Yeah.
And then that gives rise to our experience, and then we have our own languages, and within those languages we have stories and sentences that we say and all that. And I feel like what I was trying to do in that dream, try to understand what the message of each of us is and how they can be combined or parsed out, and maybe try to figure out whether all of these different little narratives tell a meta story of some sort. I think that's the project that we're in. I think we don't know what our part is. We don't know if we're interlocutors or the writer of the story, or we're listening to the story, and we probably are playing all of these parts, at different points of our lives. But you can engage with it, and you can try to make it, better, worthwhile, try to find meaning in it.
First of all, I'm really envious that you have dreams like that. My dreams are so boring. And so, that seems to me, that reminds me a lot of the kinds of stuff that Terence McKenna, the sort of great psychedelic philosopher, performance artist, talked about. He often talked in his writings and his lectures about logos, and how for him, God was this kind of linguistic principle. It was a little obscure, that the way he talked about it for me, I guess, again, because I have more conventional ideas of God, but it sounds very similar to what you're describing. And but I really like that idea, and it sort of it dovetails with this project, with this book that I just wrote, Mind Body Problems. I almost said Mind Body Stories, because that's really what it is too. Every one of us has our own story, and you can see one of the arguments that I make in my book is that not only do we not have a solution to the mind-body problem, we don't even know the right language in which to describe the problem or to try to find a solution. And in a way, each of us, if you talk to lots of different philosophers and scientists, you realize that each one of them has their own little language that they're using to try to approach the problem and describe it in a really compelling way. And the diversity is supposed to be a bad thing. And I guess now I think that the diversity is a good thing. That this wonderful multiplicity of stories that we have and languages that we have and all the ways that language keeps evolving and changing as culture changes, as we change, that's wonderful. It means that this process of creation, self-creation, is never ending. And I used to think, of course, we have to come up with the answer, the solution. And now I think that would be horrible, because that means that we haven't really found the solution, because there is no solution, but we can convince ourselves that we've found it. And that would be the end of our self-discovery. That would be a tragedy, not a triumph.
It's also like, if you do look at this as a conversation, then, if you found the answer, that means the conversation is over. Like, if that's, McLuhan had this idea of medium is the message, right? The technology that you use to transmit the message shapes that message, defines that message. I think that's also a rich idea that can be applied to everything in the world. And one way to look at this is the language that we choose defines what we're going to say, right? Even in, like, I know English and Russian, there are things that can be said in Russian that can't be said in English, and the other way around. And if you're setting this whole project up as we're looking for the answer, then if you manage to find it, done.
Yeah.
You're done. And I mean, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe if you're really tired, you want to look at life like that when you're, maybe when you're depressed, but if you look at this as a conversation that, like, the best conversation that happen in life are multidimensional and have more than just, you're not just looking for one answer to one problem. You're also, sharing your feelings, having fun, making jokes, talking about open-ended questions that are not supposed to have an answer.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have to end this conversation. I've got to do these Christmas chores today. But this has been fantastic, Nikita. I had no idea what we were going to talk about today. And
well, me neither, as I said. Yeah. Well, I had a little inclination, but not more than that.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, we haven't come up with the answer, but we've gone some places that I didn't expect to be going this morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. 3 days before Christmas.
That was a lot of fun, though.
Yeah, for me too.
Okay, so maybe, what do you say? Maybe we do it again sometime.
I'll talk to you anytime. You just tell me when you're ready for it, and you know how to find me.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right.
Okay, so I'll let you go to do your chores, Christmas chores.
And the conversation will continue. All right. Bye, Nikita.
Bye.